Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're at, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I'm Chair of the Urbanism Division, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, March 1st. We will be hearing the presentation, Women in Planning, The Road to FAICP. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the chat box found in the webcast toolbar to the right of your screen, or you can call that 1-800 number shown. For your content questions related to the presentation, again, you can just type those in the questions box located in the webinar toolbar, and we will answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. And I just ask that if your question is for a particular panelist, that you please mention that in your question so that I make sure that the correct person answers it for you. Today's webcast is sponsored by the Women and Planning Division. So thanks to them for sponsoring today. And you can check out all of our sponsors for the 2019 season on our website, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. So thanks to Women in Planning for once again hosting a session for us. Coming up on your screen is a list of our upcoming sessions. You can register for these by, again, visiting our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And actually, just before we jumped on, I got a few more emails. We have a few more reserved, and I'm getting some more information, so we should have those up for you in the next week or so. To log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, which is available for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing only, you can head over to planning.org, log into your MyAPA account, and then from there you can search for CM activities either by the title or event number of today. Again, both of which can be found on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. As I mentioned, this is available for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing only. We are, I promise, finalizing distance education sessions. If you've been on any of our other webcasts this year, every time I seem to be saying, we're finalizing our distance education sessions. Well, I really mean it this time. We will be having 1.5 law and 1.5 ethics for you, and I should have those up by next week, I promise. Like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on our sessions. And of course, I'll also post there when our distance education sessions are up and available for you to view. And of course, we are recording today's webcast. It will be available on our YouTube channel. Just head over to YouTube and search Planning Webcast, and the session will pop up for you along with almost 300 other webcasts that we have available for your viewing. And we'll also have a PDF available on our webcast webpage again, ohioplanning.org/webcast. Okay, so that's it for me. I am going to turn it over to Corinne Wendell, who will get us started. And Corinne, I just changed the presenter over to you. Perfect.
Wonderful. Thank you, Christine. Welcome everyone to another Women in Planning Division webinar. We are so happy that you all are able to be on the line with us today. It is March 1st, which marks the first day of Women's History Month. So happy Women's History Month to everyone. Today we're going to be talking about something that we haven't discussed on a webinar or really as a major part of our division, even though it's work that we have been doing all this time. So we're going to have a great discussion today. We're going to be highlighting the importance of supporting and amplifying and inducting more influential women planners into the FAICP class. A panel of distinguished women planners will discuss the importance of FAICP, the rigorous nominations process, the importance of nominating women, and they will share their own experiences of creating submissions as well as what it was like to be inducted into the College of Fellows. And so, again, my name is Corinne Wendell. I'm the chair of the Women in Planning Division. And we're going to do this little roadmap. There's a lot of different parts and pieces to FAICP, some of which you may have not realized. Even myself, I didn't realize all of the different nuts and bolts that go into becoming an inductee for the FAICP. And so we're going to go through some introductions of our panel. We're going to go over what is FAICP, how do women measure up with the number of FAICP inductees, and what does it take to have that membership? What is the nomination process? And then we're going to highlight two of our panelists who are FAICP, one most recently inducted last year. And so it'll be a really fun discussion for all of our panelists. I'm actually going to introduce our new Director of Programs for the division. Her name is Caitlin Wentz, and she's going to go ahead and introduce all of our panelists. So thank you, Caitlin.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining our call today. Like Corinne said, my name is Caitlin Wentz. I'm the Assistant Planner with Cape May County Planning Department. I have 4 years of experience in the public sector. I'm also volunteering on the APA Ambassadors Program and the Director of Programs here for Women in Planning. Next, we have Brianne Rothstein, who is the Economic Development and Housing Director for the City of Brooklyn Park. She has 12 years experience in the public and private sector, helping communities achieve their goals related to planning and development. She specializes in community engagement and collaboration with the development community to achieve win-win solutions. She volunteers as past president of the Minnesota chapter of APA, the vice chair of the Women in Planning Division, and is on the executive committee for the chapter's President's Council. She's passionate about giving back to her community and her profession. Next slide, we have Carissa Slotterback, who is the Associate Dean of the Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota. She's an Associate Professor of Urban and Regional Planning. Her research and teaching focus on the public engagement and decision-making at the intersection of environmental, land use, and transportation issues. She was recently inducted as a member of the FAICP and has led the APA Minnesota FAICP nominating committee since 2009. She holds a PhD in urban and regional planning from Florida State University. Next is Libby Tyler. Libby is a consulting planner who specializes in contract planning, marketing, development review, and environmental assessment. She has over 35 years experience as a planner working in both the public and private sectors. She's a charter member of the American Planning Association and was the first female planner in the state of Illinois to be recognized as a fellow. And Sylvia Vargas has 25 years of professional planning experience in the U.S. and abroad. She joined Calvin, Giordano & Associates after running her own small firm and is also the immediate past chair of the AICP College of Fellows Committee. Previously, she was a practice leader at WRT. Sylvia is passionate about supporting women in the planning profession. She serves on the AICP Commission and is a member of ULI's Women Leadership Initiative. She has served as an expert at the American Architectural Foundation. In recent years, Sylvia's interests have been focused on changing the nature of the planning process and its outcomes. She's particularly passionate about designing creative and fun public engagement processes. Her work has been recognized through numerous speaking opportunities and awards. Sylvia has a BA in Architectural Studies and a Master of Urban Planning from the University of Kansas. She's also a distinguished alumna. She also received a Distinguished Alumna Award from the University School of Architecture and Design in 2017. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Sylvia, who's going to talk about FAICP and its history.
Thank you, Kate. I'd like to start by expressing how honored I am to be part of this distinguished panel and to be given the opportunity to talk about the College of Fellows. So let's start by talking about what FAICP is and what it represents. Of course, FAICP stands for Fellows of the American Institute of Certified Planners and is a professional distinction, in fact, the highest distinction that is conferred by the Institute. The FAICP accolade honors professional planners who have made notable contributions to the planning field and whose careers exhibit professional excellence. Only AICP certified planners in good standing and who have been certified for at least 15 years by the time of each nomination deadline are eligible to become a fellow. Now, the Fellows Program was created in 1998, 20 years after the American Institute of Certified Planners itself was established. So both the program and the Institute are actually of fairly recent formation, especially when compared to the programs of some of our peer quote design and quote organizations, such as the American Institute of American Institute of Architects, whose fellow program was established in 1952, or the American Society of Landscape Architects, whose own program has been in existence since the 1930s. Of course, both of those organizations are much older than APA too. The first class of fellows was inducted in 1999, and at the time the induction was on an annual basis, which remained so until 2004, when the program went to a biannual induction cycle. Next. In the last 21 years, out of nearly 17,000 AICP planners that we have today, 636 planners have been inducted into the College of Fellows, and only 142 of them, or about 22% of that total, have been women. In other words, for every 30 men inducted, only 6 have been, 6 of the class have been women. And if you took the time to go through the list of fellows on the FAICP webpage, you would actually notice that the first few classes of fellows inducted into the college in particular included very few women, if any. But the ratio of women inductees in each class has been improving, and I believe that one of my fellow panelists is going to talk about that a little bit later. Next. I would say that the limited presence of women in those early classes is to some extent, at least, likely a generational demographic issue, because women then represented a smaller share of the profession than we do today. We see those first generations of fellows maturing and sadly beginning to lose some of their esteemed members to the passage of time. I think another factor in the slower rate of nomination and induction of women planners into the college may well have to do with self-imposed barriers, which I also know my fellow panelists are going to talk about a little bit later. Next. Of course, the nomination and selection processes are tough, regardless of your gender. This chart on the screen shows trend data collected and tracked by APA on the rate of selection success throughout the past 7 cycles. And the share of inductees versus nominees varies each cycle, and I think the success rate depends significantly on several factors. One has to do with the clarity of the nomination guidelines, which we at the AICP and the College of Fellows Committee try to increase with each cycle. Also, I think it has a lot to do with the increasing availability of a good network of nominee advocates through the chapters and divisions. And all of these factors in turn have a great role in elevating the quality of the nomination packages. Next. There are 4 nomination categories, which are now referred to as career focus areas, in which AICP planners may be nominated to the College of Fellows: professional practice, community service and leadership, teaching and mentoring, and research. And as you can see, percentage-wise, the categories look very similar for women fellows as they do across the entire College of Fellows. So for professional practice, that's about 55% to 57%. For community service and leadership, about 31% to 23%. Teaching and mentoring, 11% to 16%. And for research, is about 4% to 5%. Next. So those who get inducted become members of the College of Fellows, and the college as an entity actively encourages its members and others to participate in programs and initiatives in the service of communities and the planning profession, including mentoring the next generation of planners, volunteering, expertise to underserved communities, leading initiatives within APA chapters and divisions, and sharing knowledge with the planning community, allied professionals, and the wider public. And as a point of clarification on a question that I got asked a lot over the last 3 years when I was chairing the College of Fellows Committee, the College of Fellows Committee is a standing committee of the AICP Commission, and its charge is helping implement strategic actions related to the Fellows Program and addressing routine matters related to College of Fellows. Most importantly, the College of Fellows Committee is responsible for electing for each nomination cycle a College of Fellows selection committee from among the fellows of the FAICP to review, evaluate, and decide on the nominations. But the College of Fellows Committee itself does not participate in the selection process. So that's just a point of clarification. I want to do a shout out to Denise Harris, my successor as chair, who wanted to be, and I know she wanted to be here today but could not. So hi Denise, I know you're going to do a great job. And that concludes my remarks.
All right, thank you, Sylvia, so much. Next, we're going to move on to women and FAICP membership, and I'm going to turn it over to Brianne and Libby.
Thanks, Caitlin, and this is Brianne, and Denise, Libby is going to be chiming in as appropriate here. Just another shout out to Sylvia, all your work on the FAICP nominations committee, and that work, that's really where the work happens in terms of advancing FAICP. And like she said, even though they don't select them, they're a huge help and advocate through that process. And just one shout out to Carissa in particular as well, all of her work as the chair of the FAICP for the Minnesota chapter. Again, that's really where the work of putting forward these nominations happens. So thanks to both of you for advancing that, particularly with women, and for serving as role models and mentors for all of us who are hopefully future FAICP candidates. So this section of the presentation is really around a little bit of data with women in FAICP membership in particular. And Sylvia hit on some of these, so I'll try not to be duplicative. You can advance the next slide. So as Sylvia mentioned, 22% of the college right now are women, 142. Next slide.
Oh, and I just wanted to pipe in here. This is Libby Tyler. That when I was looking at FAICP in 2008, when I was successful, that number was closer to 10%. So it is moving up. And as Sylvia mentioned, there are some demographic trends at play here. I've spent many years teaching as an adjunct at the University of Illinois, and I've seen women students increase tremendously, where we're really at 50% or more in that academic program and many other planning programs. Similarly, in the workplace, I think you'll see it's not just a male profession as it was really when I started, and we're seeing more parity both in academic and the workplace. So over time, this will really help us achieve parity in FAICP, but it's going to take a lot more work on individual members' behalf and also on the organization. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Libby. And I think that's really a good point to call out, especially in 1998 when FAICP started. The percentage of eligible candidates that were women was much lower, and now every year it's increasing. According to the salary survey that APA does, we have about 38% people who take that survey within APA who are women. And so if our goal was parity, it wouldn't be 50-50, it would be somewhere in that 38 to 40% number. And so if we want to achieve parity in the College of Fellows, anytime soon, we are going to need a significant number of women nominees and then inductees. In fact, if our goal is to achieve parity by 2040, we would actually have to induct 10 more women per cycle than men, because it is a 2-year process, so every 2 years, so that's only 5 cycles. And that probably won't happen, but we do have some slides that show kind of the increase in percentage of women in inductees as well. So next slide.
Yeah, and this actually might be a great time for us to do our first polling question too, since we're talking about gender, maybe seeing how many women in planning are on the call today versus men. I think Christine can kind of do that. It's something for all of you audience members to participate in.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and launch the first poll. And everyone just look on your screen and then you can just click the button. And I'm not, honestly, panelists, I'm not sure. Do you see, can someone tell me, do you see the questions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, you do? Okay. Maybe Corinne might not because she's housing it, but.
Oh, I do also see it.
Oh, you do? You just can't vote. That's the only thing, but we know who you are.
That's right.
Okay. I'll give it another second here. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and close it and then I'll show the results. So 73% on today's call are female, 27% male, and 1% prefers not to answer. So I'm going to go ahead and close it and turn it back to you. And you're all set. Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Christine. That was a great chance to do that for the webinars that this division has hosted. That's about the breakdown in the past, as well as 25% male, 75% female on our webinar. So we're glad we're catching a broader audience than just women as well. So you can see by this chart that both the number and percentage of inductees into the College of Fellows, percentage of women has significantly increased. Particularly wanted to point out the last 2 cycles have doubled in terms of compared to previous cycles. I think that is very compelling and important to look at, to see that both on the nomination side and on the inductee side, there's been a concerted effort by chapters and divisions to put up women. And so we hope that that number continues to increase, both in the number as well as the percentage as women age into the profession. So next slide. This shows the number of fellows, women fellows who belong to which chapter. And so it really shows which chapters are that most represented in terms of women in the College of Fellows. This also is correlated to the size of the chapter. So California is the largest, California, Florida, and Texas are the largest chapters, I believe, or 3 of the 4 largest chapters in the country. So, you know, it would make sense that those be the highest numbers. But Ohio and Michigan and Illinois also have, 7 to 9. And so that shows that those chapters are putting up women inductees as well. But also it highlights the chapters who maybe aren't putting up, both just because their membership is lower, but also aren't putting as many nominees forward. And so just kind of highlights which chapters have the most fellows and which have the least.
And if I might point out a few chapters that really need to step up, in particular, Wisconsin, Iowa, New Jersey, New York outside of Metro. And I mention these because all of these areas have really highly ranked academic programs in planning. So let's get some women recognized in those chapters. And I'm sure there's others that might have just a few, and there's so many more talented women planners who've accomplished a lot and hopefully are eligible for FAICP. Thank you.
Thanks. Maybe next slide. And then this is just another way to show the percentage of women who, from the total College of Fellows that have been inducted over the years. And so you can see there's been a substantial increase in the percentage of the total college that are women, who are women. That 35 to 40% range is parity. Based on my estimates, we don't have gender data by total APA membership. They don't collect that information. And so we use the salary survey as a proxy, which, you know, it is a proxy of APA membership. And that's around that 40% mark. And so as women, again, have aged into the profession, you know, we see a larger percentage of fellows who are women. And so, you know, we would really want to see this graph maintain 38 to 45, maybe even 50% women inductees and not go down from there into the future years. But it also highlights how very low the percentages were or have been on average basically before 2008. And so that is really what accounts for the low numbers of women in FAICP. Next slide. And so there's a lot of dialogue and discussion on women in leadership in general and kind of what the barriers are to advancing to the next stage of careers. And a lot of this research and information, particularly the report that Women in the Workforce report that McKinsey puts out, you know, puts a lot of theories in place as to why this is. And I think a lot of that research and data applies across all professions, including planning. And so really what we want to spend the next portion of time talking about in this is kind of how we can break down some of those barriers that are applying specifically to FAICP, but then also more broadly to women seeing themselves in leadership positions and seeing themselves in, frankly, the profession's highest honor. Libby, I don't know if you had anything to add to that.
No, I'm just in total agreement. And these are some great resources that we'll be sharing a little later on in the presentation.
Thanks. Next slide. And so again, this is information that applies more broadly than APA, but there are some tenets about women in leadership that we know apply more broadly and apply particularly to women. Setting targets and measuring progress is one I really want to point out. In my work, I have been very vocal in my organizations as well as APA about how we cannot, you know, if we don't measure it, we don't know if we're succeeding. And so setting targets and goals, I think sometimes gets some criticism broadly, but it's very important to be intentional about that. And so if as a division or as a profession we say we want gender parity in the FAI in the College of Fellows by a certain year, what are the steps we need to do to take that and to achieve that? And it's really multifaceted. We know women have a higher need for transparent career paths and salary structure than flexible work environments. These things apply to men as well, but we know through the research that's in, particularly in the McKinsey report, but also other research that's been done, that these things are particularly important for women in leadership in all professions. So this is just a little intro to the nominations process discussion, but in my experience being on nominations committees for both the division as well as my chapter, and out there pounding the pavement and trying to recruit women to be nominees, these are just a couple of the things I've heard. And Libby, I don't know if you have any things, or anybody else on the panel, if you've heard specific things, but I'm not ready is by far the most common reason for not wanting to be nominated. And these women are, in my mind, totally qualified and definitely meet the minimum requirements. But I think there's a sense that they haven't accomplished enough. And I will say that I think people who are closer to the nominations process, who maybe nominated a candidate or maybe even seen candidates not get inducted, are even more likely to say this, right? When they want to make sure they're 100% going to get inducted before they put themselves out there like that. And not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but it does limit the pool of nominees. It's also a lot of work to apply is another thing I've heard. It takes, and we've got a slide, many more slides on the actual applications process, but it's probably 40 hours of work or more. And, it requires you to talk about yourself and really talk yourself up. And it's your chance to highlight your entire career. And so in general, I would say women are more uncomfortable with that than their male counterparts. And the last one, I don't want to fail, that one's related to I want to make sure I've accomplished more, but just this fear of if I put myself up or I put all this work in and I don't get inducted, I'd rather wait another round or another 2 rounds until I'm sure I'll be inducted. And so those are just some of the common reasons I've heard. I don't know, Libby or others, if you've heard anything else to add to this list.
Yes, I've definitely, in my work mentoring several women through FAICP, come across just a lot of, misplaced modesty, and it's very difficult to speak about yourself in a way that's really going to capture the attention of the FAICP selection. So it's sort of that modesty and some of the difficulties in communication that, and then are just tendency not to step forward that we actually see in our careers. So we see a vicious cycle almost that women can fall into of not putting themselves forward and moving boldly, holding them back in their career. And these are the very same things that will help you to achieve FAICP. And I would also note that when we talk about parity and equity, it's one thing to be mainstream planners, but we have even less equity and parity as we move into the higher levels of planning, the directorships, the executive levels, and that's reflected in the achievement gap at those higher levels, as well as a wealth gap and an income gap. So there's a lot at stake here. And I think the FAICP can help with achievement, but it's also an indicator of how we tend to hold ourselves back.
Thanks for that. And that little graphic on that slide, I think, is just really indicative of also my experience, now having almost 15 years of professional work experience with my colleagues and friends and applying for jobs. And just anecdotally, it seems like my male colleagues are more likely to apply for jobs that they maybe aren't fully qualified for, whereas women want to make sure they've checked off every single qualification before they even apply. And so that's where that imposter syndrome comes in, thinking that you have less knowledge or you know less, or that you have to be more sure of yourself before you advance in your career. When in reality, that maybe isn't how others perceive us. Next slide. All right, so
thanks.
I'll pass it on to Carissa now to highlight the nominations process.
Great, thank you, Brianne. So I'll share just a few thoughts, kind of an overview of the nomination process. And this is based on some information that's available on the FAICP and APA website, but also just my experience in leading the nomination committee for the Minnesota chapter of the American Planning Association, helping support a number of folks to go through the FAICP process, and then my own experience a couple of years ago when I was nominated and inducted. So next slide, if you will.
Just before we go on, Carissa, we have 2 more polling questions I think that it would be important for our group to answer, just to kind of shape and see the people that we have on our call. So,
Great.
Christine, if we could go to poll number 2.
Of course.
This is everybody asking your membership status, if you're AICP or FAICP or neither.
Okay, I went ahead and launched it, so folks go ahead and look at your screen and vote for me. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close it and share the results. Looks like our majority is AICP of 88%. We have 1% FAICP and 11% neither.
And Christine, could we launch the final poll?
Of course.
All right.
Okay. So we're just looking to see how many years of professional planning experience you have. So for those of you on the line, if you want to go ahead and click in. We'll give it another second here. And thanks to everyone for joining us. We have almost 375 folks on the line right now.
Yeah, I was just going to say how cool that was, that the majority are AICP. So this is perfect timing for everyone to get all that good information ahead of their nomination. So this is
right, because nominations are coming up. They're going to be due soon.
Absolutely.
October, maybe? Is that when it is?
Yes.
It is.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share the results just so we all kind of know who our co-folks are here on the line. 11% 0 to 5 years, 13% 5 to 10 years, 20% 10 to 15 years. And our majority here, 55% of the folks on the line have 15 plus years of professional experience. So I'm going to go ahead and close that and send it back to your screen, Corinne. Perfect.
All right, great. So I'll jump back in and talk a little bit about how to nominate. So there are 3 ways that nominations are submitted. One is through a chapter president. So one of the state chapters can submit. One of the ways we've organized that in the Minnesota chapter is to establish a nominating committee that plays a role in sort of administering the FAICP nominations process, supporting nominees through the process, helping to write that kind of very compelling letter to get folks nominated. Our chapter board approves any nominee that might go forward, and we have that sort of backing as a state chapter to do that. In addition, divisions like the Women in Planning Division can nominate members for FAICP. And then an additional way is to have a nomination be supported by 10 AICP members for an individual that they feel is justified in moving forward with FAICP. So each year, and we received this, I think, late in 2018 for the Minnesota chapter, chapter presidents and division chairs get lists of AICP members that are eligible for nomination. And AICP members are eligible after accumulating 15 years as AICP and completing CM requirements and the things that are associated with maintaining your AICP in good standing. So each of those chapters and divisions get that list. We as the Minnesota chapter share that out with our members and invite nominations. So in Minnesota, we have just sent that out a couple of weeks ago and are right now accepting nominations from folks within our state chapter. They have that list, can look through it and say, you know, these are folks who have accumulated a lot of experience, they're leaders in our field, have potentially the qualifications to be nominated for FAICP. And then we use those nominations to kick off the process of moving folks forward. It is, I think, important to note that assembling a nomination package is a lot of work. It's a really rewarding experience to go through that, I think, both for people who are being nominated to kind of reflect on their career, what they've accomplished so far, the contributions that they've made to the field, but I think also really satisfying for those who are involved in moving those nominations forward, being advocates for that, being members of the chapter who are seeing these folks being highlighted at the highest levels within the planning profession. It's a lot of work to be able to reflect on all of these pieces and articulate it in a compelling way. But again, I think it's also really, really satisfying. But I do recommend starting really early. Again, applications are due in mid-October this year, in October 2019. And in Minnesota, we're starting this process right now. We'll probably have a slate of nominees recommended to our state chapter board, probably in April or around that time. We'll have a committee that will help foster those nominations and move them forward, be recruiting recommendation letters and providing feedback on statements and things throughout the summer. So definitely start early. All right, next slide. You have some screenshots of some of the materials that were from the last round of nominations. The new materials are up. There's a detailed guide to the FAICP nomination process. Nominations require a small fee. In Minnesota, the state chapter has actually paid that fee for nominees that they've put forward. There are key, very specific items that are called for. There's a nomination form that identifies in particular the category in which you're being nominated. For this year, for the first time, you can actually be nominated in more than one category. In some cases, it's been difficult for people to slot themselves into just one area, like teaching and mentoring or professional practice, especially maybe for folks who are practitioners but have accumulated some adjunct teaching experience or work with students in a nearby university. There's also a checklist that just summarizes key parts of the application. The nominator endorsement letter, importantly, comes from the chapter and is sort of the chapter or the division's representation or feeling about the significance and impact and importance of this nominee. There's a summary statement. You'll need an annotated resume as well, which is quite specific on the page limit. And letters of support. I will say this is a really important but also really satisfying piece of this process. So you're invited to submit letters of support from at least 5, but up to 10 individuals who can describe your impacts on planning, on the impacts that you've had on the profession, on academia, if you're an academic. And when I was nominated, I had some letters from students. I had letters from practitioner colleagues who I've worked with. I had some letters from other faculty and other universities who have supported me and interacted with me over the years to really provide a broad view of how different people are thinking about and reflecting on the impacts that you've had in your career. So a number of pieces are required for that. In addition, the next slide just summarizes some of the pieces that I've already hit on a bit. So you do get nominated by a chapter or division. There's a lot of material that's accumulated. I would say it does say about 40 or more hours there. It definitely actually does take that long, and starting early is good, and getting feedback. And I think to the points that Brianne and Libby were making before, it's really hard to talk about yourself and sort of brag about all the things that you've accomplished in your career. And so getting feedback from other people who can sort of amp up and really kind of strengthen the statements that you might make in a more modest way, I think can be really, really helpful and make for a more compelling nomination. Having a nominator or an advocate for each of the folks who are being nominated, I think is really important. They can just keep keep you on task. They can help provide motivation, provide that feedback, and I think provide feedback for a really compelling nomination letter. Next slide. I think Brianne's going to jump in on this one.
Thanks, Carissa. I just wanted to echo the point that you made about it being a really rewarding experience as a nominator, particularly with Carissa, nominating her and getting to read all the wonderful letters of support that she had come through. It was really rewarding and inspiring. And so even though it's a lot of work, I think it's work really well rewarded and worthwhile. And so I hope none of this dissuades people from thinking about it. And I'm really happy to see 88% of attendees are AICP and 55% of attendees have 15 years plus of experience. So that gives us somewhere between 150 and 175 people on the call who very well could be eligible for FAICP. That's a huge number, a lot more than I was expecting. And so I'm really happy that you're on the call. And so this is sort of the prep for FAICP slide. So we want you to be eligible and we want you to be a nominee in the future, whether that's this round, next round, or, in 10 years. So here are some tips and tricks. Keep your resume and your CV up to date. So it can't just be a resume. It has to be a summary of your life's work. So every presentation that you've given, or if you keep track of it now, it won't be so hard to collect all that information when you are technically eligible or ready to apply. So, I'm sure over 15 years, it's hard to remember every contribution you had into speaking engagement or presentation or volunteer opportunity that you've had. So keep track of it as you go and put it in different buckets in terms of here's when I gave it at a conference, or here's when I did a blog, or or here's how I volunteered through ATA, or here's the list of research that I've worked on over the years and partnerships across different agencies, organizations. So also depending on what track you think or what bucket you think you'll apply within, review the requirements and see how your work, think broadly about your work and how it may fit into those requirements and what bucket it fits into. Get involved in APA. And so this is like more general, right? If you have maybe 10 years before you're eligible or 5 years and you really, this is a goal you have professionally, think about how you can get involved in APA. There's so many ways to connect to the professional organization through your chapter, through national divisions. There's even committees and task force. Right now, there's one on social equity and inclusion, getting involved in that work as an interest area. There's a lot of ways to connect into the profession, particularly through APA. And I do think, and this is just more of an opinion, but I do think being involved in APA, helps with, because it shows your commitment to the profession more broadly than just your work. And I know, particularly as women, or particularly with people who have families, volunteering above and beyond your job and all of the other duties can be really daunting and overwhelming. So just thinking about when in your career and when in your life that makes sense to do. And then finally, thought leadership, whether that's putting things out on LinkedIn or sharing things, contributing to planning advisory service memos or publishing research, contributing to your newsletter, anything that gets an audience that's beyond you and your organization, to be that thought leader in the profession. And then finally, just be optimistic. I think because women are less likely to apply until they're ready, you probably have a really good chance of getting inducted as long as you put the work in and think broadly about your professional career and really tack yourself up and brag about yourself. I think that all those things really increase the likelihood of getting inducted. And so don't be too pessimistic about your chances. And so I don't know, Carissa, if you have any final things to add for people who are thinking about the College of Fellows in the next few years.
I think just to emphasize that, get involved in APA. I think, many of us are doing excellent work as practitioners in academia, but I think really demonstrating that commitment to advancing the profession. And I think a key way to do that is to be involved with APA, whether it's national or the state chapter or other planning related organizations that are kind of specific to your particular context, I think is really important. So I think really demonstrating that you are advancing, contributing to the planning profession as a whole can be a really important part of making a compelling case. So I would definitely look for opportunities to do that and really tout the fact, if you have done that kind of work, really tout it in your application.
Next slide. So this slide highlights, I'm sorry, Chris, am I taking over for you? But this slide just highlights the successful fellows within each division and by nomination per division. So you can see here that women have not historically been well represented amongst division nominees. So if you are a member of any of these divisions, they may or may not have a FAICP nominating committee. I would encourage you to really challenge your division to nominate more women and have those get inducted. And Women in Planning has 7. We definitely, I want to see that number double over the next couple cycles. So if you are a member of a division, that is a way to really get connected and get involved with helping others and potentially even yourself become a fellow.
All right, thank you, Brianne and Carissa. We're on now to the member spotlight section of the webinar, and I'm going to pass it back over to Carissa to go over her experience being inducted into FAICP.
Great, thank you. Well, I was inducted a year or so ago. I think, I felt a lot of this, a lot of the things that were highlighted before. I was worried about putting myself out there and like, what if I don't get in? How's that going to feel? So I definitely kind of experienced those things. I think it was helpful to me to have the context of having worked with a few other FAICP members to be able to get them nominated, and just that context of, how does my work compare to theirs? Who are the folks that I can get to advocate for my nomination and write compelling letters about their experience working with me or the impact that I had on the field. I think that it was a really satisfying process and amazing to be part of a really great group of folks who were nominated or who were inducted in New Orleans, and just be able to be on that stage and in that space with all of these people who've made the planning profession and planning academy, an amazing place to be able to work. I think I'm probably on the younger side of many of the folks who've been nominated to FAICP, but I would definitely say, to me, FAICP should not be, it's not an end of career award. I don't think it's something that we should be thinking about as something you go for at the point of retirement. I think that many of us in the planning profession have a lot to celebrate and a lot of impact that we've accumulated even at the point of being mid-career. And I think especially as we think now about the AICP candidate program, we're having people move into AICP probably at even younger ages and sooner after completing training and planning. And I think to be able to move those folks forward and sort of get away from the expectation that this is something you do when you're nearing the end of your career, I think benefits women, and I think benefits the credential of AICP, and I think benefits the diversity of the College of Fellows as well. It was definitely a lot of work to put together the materials. I benefited a lot from being able to work with Brianne, who's on the webinar today. It was great to have someone just to be able to share materials with and, keep me motivated as as one of the slides presented before, and just to know that I had support within the state chapter to move this forward. And, you know, I probably had more experience than many of the people who are being nominated for FAICP with the process, but it definitely felt really good to feel like there was a group of people who were helping me through this process, and that was really advocating for me to be able to get this. So really, really a positive experience, and something I would definitely recommend to anyone, and certainly offer myself up as someone who would be happy to give advice if you're thinking about it.
Excellent. Thank you, Carissa, for sharing your experience. Next, we're going to move on to Libby and her experience being inducted into FAICP.
Yeah, and it's great to hear these stories. I was inducted back in 2008, and really the most motivating factor for me at the time is that I noticed that Illinois had 0 women FAICP, and we're a big state and a big planning state, and that really struck me as wrong. And I looked around, knew a lot of the women planners, and I didn't see too many other women who would be in a position to move forward at that point. So it really helped to motivate me and get me thinking about it. I was had just been the chair, or was involved being the chair of our division of women in planning. So I was thinking about these things and beginning to look at FAICP that way. I think what's really important here is thinking deeply about your accomplishment level and being strategic in your decision. I did have that motivating factor, but it's an opportunity to look back at your career and think about, well, what have I really accomplished and where have I made a difference? And this is a moment of truth and a moment for, you know, honest conversations with colleagues and friends and other folks who can give you some advice and support and some honest feedback. I totally agree with Carissa. This is not something that you should really leave to retirement. You know, if you've accomplished a lot of things in your career, you've provided service to your community or to APA, maybe you've done some award-winning work, maybe you did a plan that was recognized, maybe you've done some teaching and mentoring, it can be a whole variety of things, or created a new approach to planning that's influenced other planners. Perhaps you've authored some influential books or articles, or maybe it's just all of that together. So that's the honest assessment, and really acting at the right time in your career when you've made these achievements, but before you've begun to slow down and move towards retirement. I think that's very important. But beyond all that, finding the courage to move forward and the right type of support that will allow you to do that. And I think that that's where women often have those challenges. And certainly I felt that. I felt all those feelings of, you know, doubt and timidity even. And I did get such a great amount of support and encouragement and critique, honest critique from the people that I worked with. One other thing I didn't really anticipate is how emotional this process can be, because you're really performing a retrospective of your life and your career. And for me, it involved reaching back to people I had not spoken with in many years, and you know, seeing if they would support a nomination. And that was a very gratifying experience. I hadn't always kept in touch with these important people, and it gave me a chance to do that, and it was very fulfilling in that way. I can't emphasize enough the importance of mentors and editors and allies in the process. And I have in some of these pictures here, my mentor from the Illinois chapter at the time was Michael Blue, and Michael kept asking me the question, well, did that work make a difference? He was so good at asking the challenging question and really forcing me to evaluate my career in terms of what was difference making. I also had an excellent editor, Karen Stonehouse, also with the Illinois chapter. Very, very harsh editor, but wow, was that important. So based on that experience, I was, so thrilled to be achieve the FAICP, but I wanted to help other people, and I wanted to help other women in particular. So I've actually worked with 10 candidates, FAICP candidates, over the years very heavily, and others as well, in providing support letters, and being that kind of that critic, that encourager, that coach, and a lot of them through the division. And I can kind of brag a little bit that I've had super high success rate in getting people successfully recognized as fellows. And here's a picture on the lower left of some of my coachees, my mentees from the division. We had 3 that year that were recognized in 2012, Margot Wheeler, Lori Marston, and Patsy Petrie. And then another picture up here on the upper right is a partial picture of 2008. And if you remember from an earlier slide, I think that's when we had like 12% women, and it's just, there's a lot of dark suits in that photo. That's just a blow up, but the rest of the class looks pretty much the same. And on the lower right, I've got a picture from this past year when I did a study abroad class to Japan with University of Illinois students and students from a few other universities, and a lot of women. And so I think this is the future. Will be, women planners and students moving forward. And another positive about FAICP is it really is, not just a chance to mentor others, but also it calls you to a higher level of service in the profession and in the field and in the organization. So there's a lot of things that I do with APA now. I'm a vice chair for our diversity committee. I'm an ethics review director for my section. So I think that that's some of the unanticipated benefits of FAICP designation, that it gives you that chance to give back and to role model for the future. And so it's been very positive, and it's been thrilling for me to share with others and to see them succeed as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, everybody. Corinne, if you move to the next slide. So this is the question and answer portion. I'd encourage people to write in any questions they have for our panel. And while we're sifting through some of those, I have some questions I'd like to direct to the panel, and I'd encourage anybody to chime in here. So the first question, how can we encourage more women to consider FAICP membership? Anybody who'd like to chime in here?
This is Carissa. I'll start. I think just encouraging each other is a really key piece of this. I think, it's sort of difficult to, to do this on your own with the amount of effort that it takes. And at the same time, you do need that sort of boost of support and someone really affirming that you are ready and you are, this is the right time for you to be able to do this and encourage you along the way. So I think that role for all of us, whether women or, or men or anyone in the profession, the ways that we support each other in moving forward toward this opportunity, I think is a really important piece.
Excellent.
And this is Sylvia, if I may add, I think that certainly Carissa is right, but I also think events like this, or at least I hope events like this, where we're talking about the process, and I hope demystifying some of the requirements and the effort that it takes, and giving tips about how best to do it is another way to help get more women in the mind frame of thinking about it, at least thinking about getting nominated.
Okay, great. And in one of our previous slides, we had talked about the topic of imposter syndrome and women not feeling comfortable acknowledging and speaking to their leadership qualities. Could anyone on the panel give some advice to maybe some of the younger participants on the call today? What advice would you give for these people moving forward in their career to feel more confident in the qualities that they bring to the work that they do?
This is Libby, and I think that the confidence can build from smaller accomplishments. So think about perhaps if there's an award nomination for a plan or a program that you worked on, why not nominate it? And start looking at perhaps a way to step forward and be an officer. We're always looking for volunteers in our divisions and our chapters. Put yourself forward. So I think these smaller things you might do, or maybe it's just for one event, like this webinar, getting involved in something like that. I think that those types of things can build together and help build your confidence of the achievement. And if you notice, very accomplished people, at some point it can be excessive perhaps, but it begins, those achievements begin to build on themselves. And I think that that's the culture that we need to try to enter to really accomplish as much as we really can. So that's the advice that I would give is, start small if you need to, and then keep going.
Well, and I'll just add too, if FAICP is a goal that you have, I mean, first, like, say it's a goal that I have, put it on your goals list, and then figure out when you're eligible, and then if join an FAICP nominating committee. I think that's for me been the most compelling, inspiring, and motivating thing for me when I think about my own FAICP induction someday, like being around people who are accomplished and motivated, and then also learn. If you're super knowledgeable about the process, you're more likely to say, hey, I belong in this group of people, and I know what it takes. So even if that's your only APA way that you're involved in APA, like join a nominating committee for FAICP, meet those folks, and become really familiar with the process, and then you'll be totally confident and ready, and also have something to add to your resume. Is like, I've been working to get people into this college, and I think of Sylvia in particular being the chair of the AICP committee for FAICP. It's like that is a really great way of preparing for nomination. And so that would just be my encouragement, is to get involved in either your chapter or your division's nominating committee.
Christine, do we have questions from the audience?
Yes, we do. There are a lot of demographic kind of questions. I'm not sure if you all have the answers to these, but we'll give it a try. Do you have data broken up for women of color in terms of the inductees? That was actually asked a few times.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. That's something that we would like to receive from APA. That's something that we could look into and provide on our website. That's something that we also wanted to add, but did not have the information at hand. And so we'll be working with probably Sylvia and the commission and APA to break the data out even more into people of color, to add that to the data.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it is a great question. Unfortunately, the data that we have, which doesn't date all the way back to the beginning of the nomination process back in '99, was not broken down that way. And I know that at APA, the staff is getting better and better every cycle in collecting demographic information. And I think that now that diversity and inclusion are such prominent initiatives at both APA and the AICP, we're definitely going to see that we are going to be collecting information at that level and probably other levels that will be very useful to us in the future.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Have retired planners ever been nominated and or inducted?
This is Carissa. I'll jump in on that. I don't have stats for that, but I have definitely been involved in nominations of at least 2 people that were successful who were retired. And I think in that case, it was, reflecting on a body of work and significance of impacts over in an entire career.
This is Libby. Yeah, I think quite a few of the inductees are retirees, and I have worked with some as well. And it's seen as kind of like a capstone to a long career. But I think there's a lot of great arguments for doing that sooner. And to the earlier question, I do think there's very little diversity in the college, just as there is in our organization. And hopefully that will be changing, but very little diversity. And there are some Black women who are FAICP, but just a handful, for example. So I think that that's another goal that we need to work proactively towards.
Thank you. That question came up a few times here. We have a lot of questions, so I'm sorry if I seem a little slow getting through these, but they keep popping up and I'm just trying to categorize them. This is a good question. Your 15 years experience, is it 15 years after you get AICP or just 15 years of planning experience?
I'll take that. This is Sylvia. The minimum eligibility requirement is for planners who have had the AICP certification for 15 years and are in good standing.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Does anyone know when the last time the eligibility requirements or the nomination process was updated?
Well, I guess I'll take that as well. The nomination guidelines change slightly every cycle because we are very careful to get feedback from our selection committees. And we get very detailed feedback, as a matter of fact, on ways to improve not just the guidelines, but also the process. So as recently as this last cycle, and I think I actually saw on some of the slides a couple of pieces of information that were not consistent with the newer guidelines. We have some updated guidelines on the FAICP website. So if you're thinking about it, I would suggest that you go to that website to get the latest. But one example is, for example, just to mention one, the fact that we had the nomination categories until this last cycle, the 4 nomination categories that I mentioned, and you had to pick one for the submittal of your nomination packet. And now we, after extensive discussion, went to a career focus area instead. And because you can have several, now you can choose several for your nomination.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Next question. I will have had AICP for 15 years on 10/1/2019. Would I be eligible this year? Everyone's doing math.
Well, I'll jump in as a guess. I'm guessing not, and maybe Sylvia has more specific information, but the nomination packets are due, and then so we get a list, the chapters and the divisions get a list of eligible people who are eligible for FAICP. So I would actually check with your chapter president or division's council president or chair, because they have a list of the eligible people, and so that's kind of, and maybe Carissa knows this too, but I think that's sort of like the golden list. And then, but I know that, and it's because it's only every 2 years, you know, and you need 15 years of experience, and you know, there is some math involved, but that eligibility spreadsheet, I'm guessing, is what is gone off of now. I don't know if there's a petitions process or anything like that, but maybe Carissa or Sylvia might be able to clarify that.
This is Carissa. I've only used the list that we've received. I'm not sure what would happen if you sort of fall in that kind of window of the list being sent and the actual deadline for submitting the nomination. Sylvia, maybe?
I actually think that you have to have the 15 years by the time you submit your nomination packet, but I can check on that. And actually, the reason I was mute was I was trying to go back on the website and make absolutely sure so I don't give the wrong information. And I can't find the place, although I know I've seen this right now, but this is something that I can verify 100% in order to try and give that information to anyone who's interested and wants to contact me. And I think that my contact information is going to be at the end of the slide deck. So.
Okay, thank you. I didn't think that was going to be a stumper, but I guess it was. Next question. If a nominee is declined, can they be nominated again?
Yes. The answer is a definitive yes.
Okay. I'm getting a lot of questions from folks saying, okay, so I want to become FAICP, but I feel weird about trying to find someone to say, hey, will you nominate me? I feel like I need more support. Maybe my professional development officer is a little distant in terms of supporting or whatever the committee is in the chapter or the division. So do you ladies have any advice on how to navigate the FAICP process when you're kind of feeling like there's no one around to sort of guide you or even just nominate you?
I'll start, and if someone else wants to jump in, I'll give you the chance to think about it. But I would say if you are uncomfortable nominating yourself or asking someone to nominate you, you're going to have a challenge in getting through the process. This is a bragging process. It is extremely uncomfortable for most candidates. In my experience, men or women, it's this like, it feels self-ingratiating. It feels like, well, I just do this work. I'm a public servant. I just come and do this work. If you want to be nominated, and the first sign that you're able to get through the process is by contacting your chapter president or your division chair and saying, I would like to be nominated. That is extremely rare, I would say. And then Minnesota has a process where we have a committee that reviews the people who go into that, and then because we don't want people to waste time either, so we have a committee that says we think this candidate will most likely get through the process. And so there's a two-step process in Minnesota, and so every chapter is a little different. I would encourage you to contact your president or your section lead or your PDO or all of them and say, hey, I'm eligible and I'm interested. Because I don't know how many chapters and divisions really recruit. They might get the list and they may say, well, I don't really know anybody. We're going to skip it this year, And so if we knew there were a ton of people who were interested, that would motivate, I think, the chapters and the divisions to have a committee and to actually put candidates forward. But at the end of the day, you as the nominee do most of the work. And if you're not comfortable saying, I want to be nominated, that's the first step in what the process is like to actually get yourself in.
So I'm going to jump in. This is Sylvia again. Two things. The first one is to add to what Brianne just said. I think that if you have an interest, pay attention to your chapter announcements, because usually chapters put out a call. So I know mine here in Florida does. And so when that comes out, you can take a look at what they're asking for in order to prepare the review. Yes, they do get the same list as the other chapters, but as Brianne said, it is a matter of interest. And it does take work. So whoever is eligible, has to show that interest and take that initiative. The other thing that I wanted to just add to the previous question is that I did find the information, and the eligibility has to be at the time of the nomination deadline.
Great. Thank you for following up on that. I'm getting a few questions about formal mentorship. This is an interesting question. I guess I haven't really thought about this even for AICP or FAICP, but I think it would be particularly useful for FAICP. I don't believe there's any kind of formal mentorship or like kind of volunteer component for someone who's starting to go through the FAICP process. But do we know if that's a possibility down the pipeline, that it become part of the process, that you get hooked up with someone else who already is FAICP to sort of help guide you through and mentor you? Is that something that's a possibility in a future update?
Okay, this is Sylvia again. In fact, that is a possibility now. There are some chapters, like a Florida chapter, they have a pretty structured mentorship program, and very successful also. And I know other chapters do as well. But at the College of Fellows, we always are asking our college members, our FAICP members, to volunteer to serve as mentors also for other chapters who may not have the same structure in place yet. And so if you need that assistance, you can contact APA staff. And I think that would be Felicia Brownstein. Oh, I can give the contact information, or you can contact me and I can put you in touch. They can actually connect you with somebody who may already be waiting for a mentee.
This is Libby, and I would just chime in that a lot of the divisions are another avenue if you're looking for nomination or for mentorship. And in our division and Women in Planning, we do, for our nominees, we do match them up with a coach or a mentor. and Illinois does as well. So I think there's some kind of unofficial mentoring going on, but it would be nice if that could become more formalized in other states and other divisions.
And I'll just add, we've got Illinois, Florida, and Minnesota well represented here, but if you are looking for a connection from another chapter, I'd be happy to connect you with people from another chapter too, and just want to encourage, if there are eligible people on this call, to just consider, I mean, definitely consider it, whether it's for 2020 or 2022. We'd love to see an all-time high number of particularly women, but overall FAICP candidates too.
Thank you.
Yeah, very true.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I wanted just to say, also, we're going to be giving you, this presentation will be accessible on YouTube as well as our website, but we have some of the information for the Women in Planning Division. I would encourage all of you on the line, if you aren't already, to become a member of our division. You've seen that we have great numbers in nominating and having women be inducted into FAICP. So that's another way to get a good support system and be able to connect with other women who are FAICP and who are on the road to FAICP. So please keep that in mind also as you look to see what your next steps are.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question before we close up shop here, because again, this particular question has been asked several times now. Do we think it really makes a difference if you've spent the majority of your career thus far in public sector, the private sector, academic, nonprofit, self-employed? Does it really matter, or is there sort of a, does it go one direction more than the rest, and in terms of your background?
This is Carissa. I'll chime in. I don't think so. I think, having seen a number of folks be nominated, I think that the structure, what they're asking for, the ability to provide recommendations that reflect different aspects of your career and different views on your career, I think allows it to be definitely open. I think, more and more planners are working in a variety of organizations. The planning field is broadening. What counts as planning, how students going into the field, I think that's broadening as well. So I would say, let's use this as an opportunity to demonstrate where planners work and the significance of that work, whatever kind of organization it's in. And I think it's a pretty adaptable system for that.
Well, my personal opinion is that if you're, if you can accurately convey and your letters of support are solid, those are going to be it's not really your background or what work you do, but if your letters of support are strong and you can convey clearly about yourself, clearly, accurately, and with the most optimistic lens, those are the applications that have the best chance of getting inducted, I think, rather than necessarily the type of work you do. And again, participation in APA helps. It just does, because it shows your commitment to the broader profession rather than just your employer or your own work. So those two things, the quality of your application and then the giving back to the broader community, I think are the two things that really stand out when I look at the successful applicants.
Okay, well, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up here. It is always a pleasure to have the Women in Planning Division join us in the Planning Webcast Series for a session. So thank you to Corinne, and for the rest of our speakers, for Caitlin, who was kind of co-hosting there, and Carissa, and Libby, Brianne, Sylvia. I think I got y'all. Thank you all for joining us today and for giving us your input and your thoughts. Folks, if you have questions for these ladies, feel free to reach out to them. A PDF of this presentation will be available on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And we are recording the session, and we will get it up on our YouTube channel. Just search Planning Webcast on YouTube, and it will pop up for you. So again, thank you to the Women in Planning Division for joining us today. And everyone, we will talk next time. Have a great weekend.